everybody. Lovely to see you all. Now, this is Stephen Bartlett, and I just want you to imagine something for me. Imagine, I guess, you're a university dropout. There's a fantastic story. You're at a takeaway. You want something to eat, and you've got no money, and so you're just scrabbling around. I don't know if you've done this, I have, but you're looking for some coins. And Stephen finds coins to buy his meal, and he's delighted. That was then. In an extremely short time, Stephen is now one of the most accomplished entrepreneurs in Europe. He's a best-selling author. He has a podcast which has got millions of followers. He's a TV star, an international speaker, and he's only 30.
You're funny.
Anyway, so this is Stephen Bartlett. We're going to be talking about the next big thing. And the next big thing is kind of pretty personal, I think. So Stephen, what is that for you?
For me, it's interesting because I think there's a narrative that often makes people believe that people like myself, or people generally, have their life planned out, that we have these long, 5-year plans, 10-year plans, and I've just never been able to relate to that at all. I've really, in my life, never had a plan per se, and I think that's in hindsight, a really important strategy for a number of reasons, especially when we consider the rate in which the pace of change is increasing year by year. So a plan can actually act against you because it restricts you in terms of your ability to respond to change. So it's quite interesting. I have no idea what's next for me personally. I've lived in that state my whole life, but that's also the state that allows you to respond in an agile way to whatever opportunity presents itself. So that is my answer, and that's very much central to all of my philosophy in life, is to be able to respond to whatever opportunity presents itself today, and to be agile, and to move very quickly, and to outfail your competition. Yeah.
Interesting. Okay, now we're going to take a seat.
Okay.
Now, this is a fireside chat.
Yeah.
So let's imagine we have a fireside. You're sitting cozily with us. The fire's burning maybe there. What's your ideal fireplace like?
My idea of a fireplace, I was actually with one at one the other day, is to have my dog, maybe to have a book, maybe, and to be with either friends or people I love or family. That's my idea of a great fireside chat.
Great, so let's imagine we're in that scenario. The little dog is snoring there in next to your feet.
Okay.
So you're talking about books. Stephen published a bestseller that I was saying, Happy, Sexy Millionaire. And it's kind of like, I read it like a kind of pep talk. A pep talk for my teenagers, for example, but a pep talk for me, just giving me some very good information, and I highly advise this book. There's a lot of advice in it. The world is changing very fast, as you said.
Yeah.
Is there anything you'd like to add to what you wrote there, given what you've seen now, given how much thinking you've been doing?
Yeah, I mean, there's so many things to add. I've actually just finished writing another book, which explores 33 laws for building and becoming great. So how to build great things and how to try and become great yourself. But as it relates to that book and what I just said there about change, this is, in my new book, I really delve into the stats around the pace of change, and it's crazy. Google, I think it's Google's head of data or research or something like that, is predicting that, and these are rough numbers because I can't remember precisely, but that if we go forward 10 years, the rate of change in the world, we're going to get basically 40 years worth of change happening in a year. And you think about that from a technological perspective, you think about that from an innovation perspective, things are going to be moving at such a rapid rate that the only strategy to stay at the forefront of what's happening isn't going to be to read books, because books take many years to publish, books will be out of date. It isn't to have rigid long-term plans, it's to set up yourself, but also your team, in such a way that you're, as I said a second ago, you're outfailing your competition. And this is like central to everything I've ever done, and even central to my podcast now. The reason why the podcast is successful, in my view, is because we have an extremely high rate of failure, which means we're conducting more experiments faster than anyone else that we're competing with.
What do you mean by failure?
I mean by Let me give you an example. So let's say you're trying to market this bottle of water here. Your job is to market it, to advertise it. Now, in February 2023, no one has ever had the job of marketing this bottle of water ever before, if we're thinking about right now, this second, today. So you have a few approaches to learn about how to market this. One approach is go and read some books, maybe Google some things. In a world where things are changing so quickly, the correct answer is going to be found by those that are experimenting faster than their competition. And that are, because experiment equals failure, and failure equals feedback. So the whole premise of this is, in order for you to stay at the forefront and to find the answers, not just in marketing, but in any facet of your life or business building, whether it's how do I build a business, whether it's how do I have a successful marriage, the world has changed. So those answers, those solutions have changed too. So to find them, you're going to have to conduct a series of fast experiments to find those answers. And that's what we do on the podcast. So I can tell you, because I learned this morning, that on my podcast, if the thumbnail has red in it instead of green, 0.12% more people will click it.
Really?
Now that seems inconsequential. You say, why do you care? Well, if I can find 100 points of feedback like that, and I can find them every 10 days, that changes the trajectory of anything I'm doing. So my whole thesis, my whole strategy towards business and innovation, business building marketing, is to increase our rate of experimentation, and as I say, to outfail our competition. And I think businesses that will win in this rapidly changing world are those that are failing the fastest.
Okay, so you started this off as you, Stephen Bartlett. Now, you are Stephen Bartlett, very big Stephen Bartlett. You've got a lot of people working with you, but how does that apply to the individual? You know, somebody who's got a small startup, do they have the kind of luxury to be able to do that?
Yeah, in fact, it's your greatest advantage. Because as we all know, if we're talking about being agile and being able to move quickly and conduct experiments, that's much easier when there's one of you or 5 of you. It gets difficult when there's 5,000. And this is why big companies often have trouble with innovation and they turn so slowly, because there's a lot to lose. And this is also why incumbents, new people, new market entrants that aren't encumbered by convention and big teams and processes and sign-offs and bureaucracy, often end up displacing those incumbents. I see being a one-woman or one-man band as a tremendous advantage for you to be able to try things faster and fail faster and find new answers. It's also really, when you're competing against incumbents that have tremendous budgets, that have $1 million budgets, $10 million budgets, your answer to beating them, whether it's from a marketing perspective and you're trying to capture attention, or anything else with product innovation, is going to be found not by outspending them. You can't play that game. You can't win that war. They'll get lazy with their big budgets. It's by doing something which pushes the boundaries, that over-indexes on the pound spent in terms of the return you get on it, and that will come from innovation. It will come from bold experiments, things that they're not brave enough to try.
Okay, so there has to be a lot of courage, and I'm thinking about something Stephen was saying about the fast change, you know, the pace of, like, was it the pace of change is going to be encapsulated for 40 years in 1 year. Sorry, that was very badly expressed, but that brings a lot of uncertainty.
Yeah.
How do you feel about uncertainty?
I accept it to be the nature of life. I accept that uncertainty is a state of being that we'll always all be in. I think the risk is allowing uncertainty to force you to be intimidated into procrastination via worrying about the future. I think on a personal level, staying in a certain miserable situation is much worse than the uncertainty you encounter as you go in search of a better situation. And uncertainty and comfort's almost the opposite of uncertainty, right? When you're in a certain situation, you have a certain degree of comfort. When you're uncomfortable, you're in uncertainty. And I think comfort in many respects can be a huge curse, both in business but personally as well. So I try and I think a lot about my relationship with uncertainty. And it's funny because a second ago you said that takes a lot of courage.
Yeah.
Now, in my view, taking no risk is the biggest risk, personally and professionally, in business, in life, and marketing. So for me, the courageous thing to do is to take no risks. That for me is a terrifying prospect, because we all know, no matter what business you're in, no matter what profession you're in, there is a bulldozer behind you right now. It's behind me. It's called innovation or disruption, or whatever you want to call it. It's the bulldozer of innovation, and it's steaming towards your profession and your business, the thing you do right now. If you stay there, it's going to get you, right? At some point, the bulldozer will reach where you're currently stood. It will disrupt the way you conduct your business. Your profession will probably eventually become redundant. You have to change. And your relationship with change, specifically your relationship with quitting a comfortable situation, does seem to be a real defining thing when you look back on your life. Now, I certainly wouldn't be where I am today had I not had an unusually healthy, peaceful relationship with quitting things. That certainly wouldn't be the case.
So quitting is good. Being courageous is not necessarily good.
It's the word courageous and bravery, they're like subjectively different. So when I dropped out of university, people said, "You're so brave for doing that." I look at them and I say, "I would have been brave for staying."
Yeah. So it depends how you look at it. Okay. So what I'm wondering now, because you were just talking about your new book, and I imagine you said there's 33 pillars that you have been researching.
Yeah.
Can you just give us a little bit of an overview of what all that's about?
Yeah. So there's 8 or 9 topics on the self, which is all about you. So your mind, how you behave, how you take care of yourself. The next is about mindset. So the mindset of building and becoming great, and I look at a variety of different things. The next thing is the story. So there's about 9 points on the story you tell, which is all about marketing. And then the last 8-9 points are all about the team, which is the team you build and the people you bring along on that journey with you. And I've gone quite deep into the science and psychology on all of those points. Things that I just reflect on in my life and I wish I'd known, before I started.
What's the number one thing you wish you had known before you started?
So many things. Number one, I think the thing that stood out front in my mind when you said that was just the incredible importance of, I'm going to say 2 things if I may.
You can.
Number one, I'm going to say, is the team. I didn't realize the importance of that when I started out. I tended to believe that my outcomes were going to be determined by how good I was, how many skills I had. As I've learned from interviewing some great entrepreneurs like Richard Branson, who we were talking about a second ago backstage, Richard Branson's dyslexic, so he struggles with words. He's also struggles with maths. And when I spoke to him in New York, he said to me, because I was dyslexic and because I didn't feel like I could personally do a lot, I became a fantastic delegator. So by the time I was 50 years old, I was running the biggest business group in Europe, and I didn't know the difference between net profit and gross profit. He actually told me about a time when he's in a meeting at 50 years old as the CEO of the Virgin Group, and one of his colleagues says, "Richard, you don't know the difference between net and gross profit?" He goes, "No." So they pull him out of the room, and they draw a picture of an ocean, and they put a net into the ocean, and they say, "Richard, all the fish in the net, that's your net profit. You get to keep that." Imagine that. 50 years old. And what that taught me as I reflect on my own life is it's not how do I do that, it's who. Who can I get to do this with or for me? And that's what great entrepreneurs seem to understand. And entrepreneurs, as they mature, pivot away from thinking, I need to learn everything, to who can I get to join this mission? And that's a lesson I learned maybe in year 3 or 4 of my business when I hired a great person and they changed the game. And the crazy thing that happens when you hire a great person is they then hire loads of great people. Great people hire great people. Not so good people don't hire very good people. I can actually prove it in one of my former companies where this individual ended up getting fired, And you look back and you go, oh, everyone they hired got fired. And then you look at Katie Leeson. She was hired, an amazing A player. And then everyone she hired became an A player. And we only had 20 A players in the company. Katie hired 8 of them. And so that really made me reflect that really my job, as Steve Jobs often said, is to be a great talent scout and to be incredibly ambitious about the people I hire. It's a bit of an interesting mind experiment, but theoretically, if you had hired Steve Jobs back then, you would have had a $2 trillion company. If you had hired Steve Jobs and created a culture that got the best out of him, because everything came after Steve, right? Steve Wozniak came after Steve Jobs, and then thousands of people. So if you had hired that, because that's the thing in business, everything comes from someone's brain. Every marketing idea, product, it's all from someone's brain, from a human being. No matter what industry you're in, you are a recruitment company. And understanding that at its core, that you're playing a talent war, is, I think, the most important thing.
Talent war, and that's very important. Now, there's 2 things I've been thinking when I've been listening to you. First one, I would like to talk about the issue that you brought up when you were talking about Richard Branson and his dyslexia. Now, on a different tangent in some respects, because it does show this importance for inclusion. And we were talking about this just a second ago, about how you are actively trying to bring in people from disadvantaged backgrounds into those talent teams. Why is that important?
You know, I'm going to defer to something Barack Obama said when we both spoke at a conference in Sao Paulo in Brazil, and he was up before me, and he said to Brazil that if you're not inclusive as a country, all you're doing is punishing yourself because you're leaving your talent off the field. And I also have just learned that from being a dragon on Dragon's Den. There's 5 of us there on that panel, but there's only one person on the panel that is a mother. So if an entrepreneur comes through the doors and they're pitching a product for mothers, well, we all defer to Sarah Davis and her experience, her lived experience, because if Sarah wasn't there, then it's very easy to see how we could be tricked, how we could end up deploying our capital without fully understanding the problem that the customer, this entrepreneur's product, is trying to solve. So, I mean, that's just a very simple idea to understand, that you have a blind spot if you leave people off the field. As a country, as a business, in the boardroom, in any project you're building, it is a competitive advantage, and that's supported by the facts, to be inclusive in the boardroom at the process when key decisions are made. You're only hurting yourself if you're not. And that's something that I've come to learn in business time and time again.
And what do you get out of bringing in people into your businesses in practical terms? So that was Dragon's Den. But when we're talking about AI, when we're talking about the metaverse, when we're talking about that bias that can go in, I guess, what are the advantages of making sure that diversity is present at that point?
Yeah, it's like inputs and outputs. You have to have, if you want to be representative of the world, if you're trying to build something that represents the world, whether it's in VR, AI, whatever it is, you need to make sure the data that's going into that input is also representative of the world, or you'll be misbalanced on one end of that equation. And then you're not going to be able to create products that fully represent the entire market. So again, it's a disadvantage to nobody else but yourself to not be fully representative of the world, and to not make decisions and build products on that basis.
Okay, so let's loop back to your book, and the first pillar that we were discussing, working on yourself.
Yeah.
Now, I'm going to link up that and your experiences on Dragon's Den. Dragon's Den, if you haven't seen it, it's this amazing addictive program on British TV where James and a panel of 4 other people, if I'm correct.
Yeah, Stephen, yeah.
Yeah, have young entrepreneurs or old entrepreneurs come up and pitch their ideas. And I think you have 7 minutes to decide.
Well, that's what it looks like on the telly.
Oh, really?
Yeah, but sometimes it's 3 hours.
Oh, is it?
The pitches can be 1 to 3 hours long.
Oh, there we go. We get the inside story.
Yeah.
And then you have to basically decide if you're going to invest or not. A lot of money. So is there a mindset that you have basically managed to detect in terms of your research, in terms of those people you see up in front of you, which means that they are kind of ready to embrace that next big thing?
It's gonna sound like I'm repeating myself a little bit here, but I actually got to speak with Barbara Cochran, who is on the US version of Dragon's Den called Shark Tank. And I asked Barbara that question. I said, of all your investments you've done over the years that you've been on the show, which entrepreneurs are successful and which ones tend to fail? And her point was, it's all about, and this goes back to what I was saying earlier on, how well they adapt to change. So you have two different types of people when change happens. You have those that tend to implode. They might fall into worry. We call it flapping. They might panic, and that causes inaction. And then you have another type of entrepreneur that when everything hits the fan, which it will inevitably happen over and over and over and over again, they are proactive, they are calm, and they are action-orientated, and they are optimistic. Like, one thing you can be sure of in business is that things are going to go wrong, and it's going to happen over and over again. So you're really, if there's something that I note, so if I have that as a truth, as I'm looking at an entrepreneur stood in front of me, what I need to find is an individual who has it within their character to adapt. Because, it's hard to think of many businesses where their current proposition, the business that you see today, represents the initial hypothesis they had in those early years. Pretty much no business, even Amazon. That was a bookstore. Yeah. Before that, it was something else. Now, most of their revenue one of the biggest parts of their business is AWS, which is servers, cloud infrastructure. So it's adaptability again, because, and when we think forward at the pace of change, adaptability is going to be more important than ever before.
Okay, so that brings me to just a brief answer, because we're running out of time, but that leap into the future, there's been so much discussion here, obviously, about the metaverse. How do you feel about that?
I don't think people truly understand what it means yet. I would argue that we are living in the metaverse already. You look at the screen time on the mobile phone of a 16 to 25-year-old, and you'll find screen time that ranges anywhere between 2 hours and maybe 10 hours. That's 10 hours in a virtual world, looking down at an illuminated piece of glass. I would argue that for many of us, and especially younger generations, Gen Z, they are very much already living as cyborgs in a metaverse. When people think about the metaverse, they almost imagine this, we put something on our head or we put a contact lens in and we spend our time in a different world. Now, there's a number of things with that reality that I feel uncomfortable about. Having recently done a podcast interview with a scientist, there are some human things we're never going to be able to escape. Touch, physical touch, just happens to be one of them. And if you want some science on that, if you look at the podcast I did with a guy called Professor Dacker, he asserts that things like connection and touch extend your life by 10 years. I remember in my psychology class when I was 16 years old, looking at the research can't remember his name, but it was conducted on rhesus monkeys, these small monkeys. They gave the monkeys the opportunity to either have a mother who was made out of metal and had food, or a mother who was made out of soft material, and the monkeys would choose the mother made out of soft material over the food. Now, when they only had the choice of this metal mother, the monkeys exhibited what one might assume to be psychotic and antisocial personality disorders. It's innate with us that we're meant to be connected in our tribes, and touch has been associated with a huge reduction in stress, with positive mental health, with all of the things that make us feel good. So the physical world is here to stay, and I see the virtual world, the metaverse, as an accompaniment, as the mobile phone has been. But I don't perceive a time where we'll live in a virtual world as many think. I think that's somewhat overestimated. And if anything, I think we're already there.
Interesting. Okay, and then finally, I know that the gratitude is important to you. It's important to a lot of us. We need to feel kind of grateful for what we have. We have an awful lot. So what are you grateful for today?
Yeah, gratitude really matters. I'm grateful for my team. I'm grateful for the people that listen to the podcast, all the people that have supported us over the years, my family. Gratitude's important because I remember Mo Gaudat said to me one day, he said, you'll be happy when your expectations of life are met. And you'll be unhappy when your expectations of how your life is supposed to be going are unmet. And what gratitude does is it's an acknowledgement that my expectations of life are being met. And that's what gratitude is. And I'm grateful for so many things, you know. It's important to remind myself of that all the time because especially in a busy world, or if your profile increases or your success increases, it's very easy for your expectations of life to change and therefore go unmet. So I'm very grateful. What are you grateful for?
I'm very grateful for being here. I know that sounds a bit corny, but it's great to speak to you. I've loved actually discovering what is happening in Leap, meeting all these amazing people. So that's what I'm grateful for today.
Thank you. Thank you for a lovely conversation. Thank you all.
I loved it.
Thank you.